Hello students of Standard 10th. Welcome to the e-learning classes of DAV Moyle Public School. Subject Science. Our today's topic is sexual reproduction. We all are also familiar with modes of reproduction that depends on the involvement of two individuals before a new generation can be created. Bulbs alone cannot produce new calls, nor can hens alone produce new chicks. In such case, both sexes, males and females, are need to reproduce new generations. What is the significance of this sexual mode of reproduction? Are there any limitations of the sexual mode of reproduction which we have been discussed above? As we all know that there are various methods of asexual reproduction, then the question arises why the sexual mode of reproduction is necessary. The creation of two new cells from one involves copying of the DNA as cell well as the cellular apparatus. The DNA copying mechanism, as we have noted, cannot be absolutely accurate, and the resultant errors are as a source of variations in populations of organisms. Every individual organism cannot be protected by variations, but in a population, variations are useful for ensuring the survival of the species. It would therefore make sense if organisms came up with reproductive modes that allowed more and more variations to be generated. While DNA copying mechanisms are not absolutely accurate, they are precious enough to make the generations of variations a fairly slow process. If the DNA copying mechanism were to be less accurate, many of the resultant DNA copies would not be able to work with the cellular apparatus and would die. So, how can the process of making variants be speed up? Each new individual is made in a DNA copy that already has variations accumulated for previous or previous generations. Thus, two different individuals in a population would have quite different patterns of accumulated variation. Since all of these variations are in living individuals, it is assured that they do not have any really bad effects. Combining variations from two or more individuals would thus create new combinations of variation. Each combination would be novel since it would involve two different individuals. The sexual mode of reproduction incorporate such as the process of combining DNA from two different individuals during reproduction. But this creates a major difficulty. If each new generation is to be the combination of the DNA copies from two pre-existing individuals, then each generation will end up having twice the amount of DNA that the previous generations had. This is likely to mess up the control of cellular apparatus by the DNA. How many ways can we think for the solving this difficulty? We have seen earlier that as organisms become more complex, the specialization of tissue increased. One should that may build cellular organisms have found for the problem mentioned above is to have special lineage of the cell is specialized organs in which only half the number of chromosomes and half the amount of DNA as compared to the non-reproductive body cells. This is achieved by a process of cell division called meiosis. Thus, when germ cells from one individual combine during sexual reproduction to form a new individual, it results in establishing of the number of chromosomes and the DNA contained in the new generation. If the zygote is to grow and develop into an organism which has highly specialized tissue and organs, then it has to have sufficient stores of energy for doing this. In very simple organisms, it is seen that the two germ cells have not very different from one another or may even be similar, but as the body design becomes more complex, the germ cells also specialize. One germ cell is large and contains the food stored, while the other is smaller and likely to be motile. Conversional, the motile germ other is smaller and likely to be motile. Food We shall see in the next few sections how the food needs to create these two different type of gametes give rise to differences in the male and female reproductive organs, and in some cases differences in the bodies of the male and female organs. Sexual reproduction in flowering plants. The reproductive parts of angiosperms are located in the flower. You have already studied the different parts of a flower: sepals, petals, stamens, and pistils. Stamens and pistils are the reproductive part of a flower, which contain the germ cells. What possible functions would the petals and sepals serve? The flower may be sexually or unisexual when it contains either stamens or pistils, or bisexual when it contains both stamens and pistils. Stamen is the male reproductive part and it produces pollen grains that are yellowish in color. You have seen the yellowish product that often stick on your hands if we touch the stamens of the flower. Pistil is present in the center of a flower and is the female reproductive part. It is made up of three parts. The swollen bottom part is the ovary, middle elongated part is the style, and the terminal part, which may be sticky, is the stigma. The ovary contains ovules and each ovule has an egg cell. The male germ cells provided by pollen grain fuse with the female gamete present in the ovule. This fusion of the germ cells or fertilization gives us the zygote, which is capable of growing into a new plant. Thus, the pollen needs to be transferred from the stamen to the stigma. If this transfer of pollen grains in the same flower, it is referred to as self-pollination. On the other hand, if the pollen is transferred from one flower to another, it is known as cross-pollination. This transfer of pollen from one flower to another is achieved by agents like wind, water, or animals. After the pollen lands on a suitable stamina, it has to reach the female germ cells, which are in the ovary. For this, a tube grows out of the pollen grains and travels through the style to reach the ovary. After fertilization, the zygote divides several times to form an embryo within the ovule. The ovule develops a tough coat and is gradually converted into a seed. The ovary grows rapidly and rips to form a fruit. Meanwhile, the petals, sepals, stamens, styles, and stigma may shrivel and fall off. Have you been observed any flower part still persisting in the fruit? Try and work out the advantages of seed formation of the plant. The seed contains the fruit or the future plant or embryo which develops into a seedling under appropriate conditions. This process is known as germination. Reproduction in human beings. So far we have been discussed the variety of modes that different species use for reproduction. Let us now look at the species that we are the most interested in, namely humans. Humans use a sexual mode of reproduction. How does this process works? Let us begin at an apparently unrelated point. All of us now know that our body change as we become older. We have learned changes that takes place in our body earlier in previous topics. We noted that our height has increased continuously from earlier age till now. We acquire teeth when even lose the old, so called milk teeth, and acquire new ones. All of these are changes that can be grouped under the general process of growth, in which the body becomes larger. But in earlier teenage years, a whole new set of change occurs that cannot be explained simply as body enlarged. Instead, the appearance of the body changes, proportions change, new features appears, and so do new sensations. Some of these changes are common in both boys and girls. We begin to notice thick hairs growing in new parts of the body, such as armpits and the genital areas between the thighs, which can also become darker in color. Thinner hair can also appear on legs and arms, as well as on the face. The skin frequently becomes oily, and we might begin to develop pimples. We begin to be conscious and aware of both our own bodies and those of others in new ways. On the other hand, there are also changes taking place that are different between boys and girls. The girl's breast size begins to increase with darkening of the skin of the nipples at the tips of the breast. Also, girls begin to menstruate at around this time. Boys begin to have new thick hair growing on the face and their voice begins to crack. Further, the penis occasionally begins to become enlarged and erect either in daydreams or at night. All of these changes takes place slowly, over a period of months and years. They do not happen all at the same time if one person, nor do they happen at an exact age. If some people they happen earlier and quickly, while in others they can happen slowly. Also change does not become complete quickly either. For example, thick hairs on the face in boys appears as a few scattered hair first, and only slowly does the growth begins to become uniform. Even so, all these changes show differences between peoples, just as we have differently shaped nose or fingers, so also we have different patterns of hair growth or size and shape of breast or penis. All of these changes are aspects of the sexual maturation of the body. Why does the body show sexual maturation at this stage? We have talked about the need for specialized cell types in multicellular bodies to carry out specialized functions. The creation of germ cells to participate in sexual reproduction is another specialized function, and we have seen that plants develop special cells and tissue types to create them. Humans begins also develop special tissues for this purpose. However, while the body of the individual organisms is growing to its adult size, the resources of the body are mainly directed to achieving this growth. While that is happening, the maturity of the reproductive tissues is not likely to be a major priority. Thus, as the rate of general body growth begins to slow down, the reproductive tissues begin to mature. This period during adolescence is called puberty. So, how do all the changes that we have talked about link to the reproductive process? We must remember that the sexual mode of reproduction means that germ cells from two individuals have to joined together. This can happen by the external release of germ cells from the bodies of individuals as happens in flowering plants, or it can happen by two individuals joining their bodies together for internal transfer of germ cells for fusion, as happens in many animals. If animals are to be participate in this process of maturity, their state of sexual maturity must be identifiable by other individuals. Many changes during puberty, such as new hair growth patterns, are signals that sexual maturity is taking place. On the other hand, the actual transfer of germ cells between two peoples needs special organs for the sexual act, such as the penis when it is capsule of becoming erect. In many, such as humans, the baby is carried in the mother's body for a long period and will be breastfed later. The female reproductive organ and breast will need to mature to accommodate these possibilities. Let us now look at the system involved in the process of sexual reproduction. Male reproductive system. The male reproductive system, which is seen in the given figure, consists of portions which produce the germ cells and other portions that deliver the germ cells on the site of fertilization. The formation of germ cells or sperms takes place in the testes. These are located outside the abnormal cavity in scrotum because sperm formation requires a lower temperature than the normal body temperature. We have discussed the role of testes in the secretion of the hormones testis or the testosterone in the previous chapter. In addition to regulating the formation of sperms, testosterone brings about change in appearance seen in boys at the time of puberty. The sperms formed are delivered through the vas deferens, which unites with a tube coming from the urinary bladder. The urethra thus forms a common passage for both the sperms and urine along the path of the vas deferens. Glands like the prostate and the seminal vesicles and their secretions so that the sperms are now in a fluid, which makes their transfer or transport easier, and this fluid also provides nutrition. The sperms are tiny bodies that consist of mainly genetic material and a long tail that helps them to move towards the male or female germ cell. Female reproductive system. The female germ cells or eggs are made in the ovaries. They are also responsible for reproduction of some hormones. Look at the given figure and identify various organs in female reproductive system. Have you seen when a girl is born, the ovaries already contain thousands of immature eggs. On reaching puberty, some of these starts maturing. One egg is produced every month by one of the ovaries. The egg is carried from the ovaries to the ovum through a thin oviduct or fallopian tube. The two oviduct unite into an elastic bag-like structure known as the uterus. The uterus opens into the vaginal through the cervix. The sperm enters through the vaginal passage during sexual intercourse. They travel upward and reach the oviduct where they may encounter the egg. The fertilized egg starts dividing and form a ball of cells or embryo. The embryo is implanted in the lining of the uterus where they continue to grow and develop organs to become fetus. We have seen in earlier sections that the mother body is designed to undertake the development of the child. Hence, the uterus prepares itself every month to receive and nurture the growing embryo. The lignin thickness and is richly supplied with blood to nourish the growing embryo. The embryo gets from the mother's blood with the help of a specialized tissues called placenta. This is a disc which is embedded in the uterine walls. It contains villi on the embryo side of the tissue on a large surface area for glucose and oxygen to pass from the mother to the embryo, where can be removed by transferring them into the mother's blood through the placenta. Development of the child inside the mother's body takes approximately 9 months. The child is born as a result of rhythmic contractions of muscles in the uterus. What happens when the egg is not fertilized? If the egg is not fertilized, it lives for about 1 day. Since the ovary releases one egg every month, the uterus also prepares itself every month to receive a fertilized egg. Thus, its lining becomes thick and spongy. This would be required for nourishing the embryo if fertilization had taken place. Now, however, this lignin is not needed any longer, so the lignin slowly breaks and comes out through the vagina as blood and mucus. This cycle takes place roughly every month and is known as menstruation. It usually lasts for about 2 to 8 days. The important point is reproductive health. As we have seen, the process of sexual maturation is gradually and takes place while general body growth is still going on. Therefore, some degree of sexual maturation does not necessarily means that the body or the mind is ready for sexual act or for having and bringing up children. How do we decide if the body or the mind is ready for this major responsibility? All of us are under many different kind of pressures about these issues. There can be pressure from our friends or participating in many activities, whether we really want to do or not. There can be pressure from families to get married and start having children. There can be pressure for government agencies to avoid having children. In this situation, making choice can become very difficult. We must also consider the possible health consequence of having sex. Since the sexual act is a very intimate connections of the bodies, it is not surprising that many diseases can be sexually transmitted. These includes bacterial infection such as gonorrhea and syphilis, and viral infections such as WAST and HIV/AIDS. It is possible to prevent the transmission of such disease during the sexual act using a covering called a condom for the penis during sex helps to prevent transmission of many of these infections to some extent. The sexual act always has the potential to lead to pregnancy. Pregnancy will make major demand on the body and the mind of the woman, and if she is not ready for it, her health will be adversely affected. Therefore, many ways have been devised to avoid pregnancy. These contraceptive methods fall in a number of categories. One category is the creation of a mechanical barrier so that sperm does not reach the eggs. Condoms on the penis or similar covering worms in the vagina can serve this purpose. Another category of contraceptive acts by changing the hormonal balance of the body so that eggs are not released and fertilization cannot occur. These drugs commonly need to be taken orally as pills. However, they can change hormonal balances. They can cause side effects too. Other contraceptive devices, such as the loop or the copper T, are placed in the uterus to prevent pregnancy. Again, they can cause side effects due to irritation or irritants of the uterus. If the vast difference in the male is blocked, sperm transfer will be prevented. If the fallopian tube in the female is blocked, the egg will not be able to release the uterus. In both cases, fertilization will not take place. Surgical method can be used to create such blocks, while infections and other problems is not performed properly. Surgery can also be used for removal of unwanted pregnancies. These may be misused by the people who do not want a particular child, as happens in illegal sex selective absorption or abortion of female fetus. For a healthy society, the female-male sex ratio must be maintained. Because of reckless female fetidity, child sex ratio is declined at an alarming rate in some sections of our society. Although parental sex determination has been prohibited by law, we have noted earlier that reproduction is the process by which organisms increase population. The rate of birth and the death in a given population will determine its size. The size of the human population is a cause of concern for many peoples. This is because an expanding population makes it harder to improve bodies' standards of living. However, in inequality in society is the main aim for poor standards of living for many people. The sizing of the population is relatively unimportant if we look around us. What can we identify as the most important reason for poor living standards? Now it's time to check your knowledge about today's topic. Here are some questions as your assignment. I hope you understand today's topic. We again meet with new video. Till then, stay at home, be safe, be happy.